Producer Profile is a show where we showcase some of the talented people who work behind the scenes in the entertainment, business, and local communities while making positive influences on the lives of others.
Welcome to Producer Profile. I'm Stella Winston.
And I'm Jim Hill.
Our guest today has written a book. Her name is Edna Wells Handy, Handy Esquire, and she's written a book, You Can Pass Any Bar Exam. I'd like to welcome you to Producer Profile.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, how should we address you?
Edna.
Edna. Okay, cool. Now, let's get down to the reason why you wrote this book.
Okay. All right. When I graduated from law school, I started work in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. And there were a number of people there who were involved in bar review, and at that time, which is many, many years ago, there was concern that particularly African Americans were not passing the bar in the numbers that would indicate a higher pass rate. And they started a program to help students look at those issues and help them prepare for the exam. And I was asked if I would come and work with them. So I started working with them and started seeing patterns. Mm-hmm. I would see students who were really bright, articulate, smart, and for whom you would think there would be no problem in passing the bar, having problems passing that bar. And as I lectured to students and did tutoring with students, I started seeing certain behaviors. Behaviors that were personal to the individual, but also behaviors that were even larger than the individual, behaviors that I would see in students preparing for other endeavors, particularly African Americans, but it's not limited to African Americans. It could be students who are first generation, college, high school graduates, students, women, for example, students who had different learning styles. Mm-hmm. Because what we see in our educational system is basically a one-size-fits-all model. You're a group of students taught in either a lecture or in a classroom, and it's basically tailored to the average student, the bell curve and kind of like right to the middle. But not everyone learns in that style. Some people are visual learners. I'm a visual learner. I like to see things. Mm-hmm. So that if someone says to me, well, this piece of property is northwest of this other property, I have to put my little north, south, east, west sign so I can visualize it. Some students are tactile learners. They like to manipulate it. I remember once my daughter had a problem, know that you're a math teacher, and it was one of those, if two trains left the station at the same time and one was going 70 miles an hour. Well, we took blocks that she was playing with, and we made those two trains, and we had them moving out of the station, and she was able to then kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what we're talking about.
So she's a tactile learner,
right,
so she had to actually physically touch those trains.
That's right, and others are auditory learners, mm-hmm. and some people might appreciate it. They say, well, I study best listening to music. Well, that's because your auditory neurons and nerve endings are being stimulated at the same time that you're going through this intellectual process. So our educational system doesn't necessarily address those individual learning mm-hmm. styles. And what you see in high stakes exams, which is what the bar exam is called, and the SATs, for example, where our society and the individual put hold them so dearly, you see those kinds of deficiencies, and I don't want to say deficiencies, differences mm-hmm. come out. Mm-hmm. And so when I was with my students, I began to see, okay, they're learning a little differently here. You don't have the natural, and I'm listening to how I'm speaking because we're all programmed,
sure.
And so it's the cultural aspects of our learning.
Now, one of the things that you had mentioned before was that we come with like a lot of baggage, and that's something that you as a consultant to the individual as well as to the schools that you consult, that you have to help the individual realize that, look, if you're going to pass this bar exam, there are certain things that you have to do. Mm-hmm. There are certain things that you have to give up. Like, for instance,
okay, well, I lectured today at a law school, and I said to students, let's look at working. If you are working to eat, then clearly you have to work. But if you're working to maintain a lifestyle to which you've grown accustomed, for example, cell phones and beepers and wrap nails and extensions, and all of those add up. If you're working to maintain that lifestyle, you got to understand that the majority of people taking this bar exam, they're not working. And the difference between you working and someone not working is 400 hours.
One thing, you're addressing poverty, but another thing I'm concerned with is bias, okay? All the way from elementary school to high school to college to grad school, you know, I see the bias. I've been through the bias, you know. I looked at the black teachers, okay? They're failing the exams, okay? They can't, and they're suing the Board of Education. They're saying that the exams are culturally biased. I remember when my brother and them were all getting out of law school, and my brother went to Cornell, and they were talking about the New York bar, how hard it was, and he had to take it twice in order to pass it. Then I'm looking at, let me go back to elementary school. They're doing the reading examination, and they're giving them a test. They gave a test on an actual meal. They were talking about tossed salad. Okay, now I don't remember Mama fixing me a tossed salad. Okay, so I said, then these kids are going to fail that. Right. You know, because they're asking the ingredients of what are you going to put in a tossed salad.
Or,
you know,
or a cup goes on a plate. Maybe you drank out of a jar in your family growing up. You didn't have a cup.
Right.
So so that's where the cultural bias comes in. But I think you address that because you talk about tests as being gatekeepers.
Right.
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 So what is that? And that's something that you address quite well.
And in fact, in 1990, the National Testing Commission did a study and found that the differences between the pass rate of whites and African Americans, and I know there are whole groups of other peoples in between, but because the differences are so stark, literally and figuratively, between African Americans and whites, they use those. They found that the differences between the test scores of blacks and whites are the same from those tests you take to get into pre-K, those private schools, through the licensing exam, which is the bar exam. It's a licensing exam, just like the CPA for accountants and the nurses exam and the teachers exam.
Right.
So clearly, these exams are capturing something other than individual performance.
Right.
But I say to everyone, my students, I say, assume the exam is biased. Let's not even say bias is such a nice word. Let's say racist. Okay. Let's say there's a white lady sitting up there noting where you're sitting down. When you hand in your paper, she puts a big B on it. Now, what you going to do? You're not going to take the exam? I don't think so. You're going to take the exam. And the key is that we're no strangers to bias or outright racism. I mean, the question, we had to deal with the issue of the poll literacy test and the jelly beans in the jar. You address that on a number of levels, and I indicated before there's an analogy that my friend makes called everyone has a nickel in the quarter. Okay, say the quarter or the 25 cents is the problem, and the problem is the pass rates. There's a difference between white and black pass rates that we need to address. Well, some part of that is the bias, because that same testing commission found that every exam is a product of bias because we are culturally determined by our environment. And so you're going to find those kinds of biases, and you're going to find them all over, and you're going to find them from everyone. There's a bar exam question that talks about this area of the country being a mecca for a hotbed of controversy. Well, my Arab students that I tutor got all upset. Oh, Mecca, what do they mean by Mecca? Mecca. I said, fine, cross the word out. Don't get involved in that aspect of it. The overarching issue, you have your groups take care of. For example, you sue. But while that lawsuit's pending, what do? You not take the exam? You not study? No. You have a nickel in that quarter, and your nickel is your personal performance or your personal practice, what you come to the table with. And what I do with students is address that you come to the table with two things. One, a mind game, and your performance. And so much of what I was seeing with my students early on when I first got into bar testing was that the mind game was one of the major things causing the individual student to fail. That they didn't think they could. I mean, just listen to you say, the bar exam is hard. I say to my students who are going to take the bar exam, how many of you have heard that the bar exam is hard? Hard, and most everyone raised their hand. Well, how do people know this? Have you ever seen a bar exam? No, they've never seen a bar exam. I say to my students, have you ever seen a bar exam? No, they haven't. So how do you know it's hard? That's part of the culture, to assign some level of difficulty, which then raises the kinds of fears that we have, particularly as African Americans, about the kinds of stereotypes. And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay, now we're going to take a musical break, but when you come back, I want you to give us like your prescription on how to pass the bar exam. We're going to listen to Delarice sing MacArthur's Park. So when we come back, we'll hear her prescription. That's right.
Della.
There will be another song for me, and I will sing it. There will be another dream for me. Somebody is gonna bring it. I will drink the wine while it is warm, and never let you catch me just looking at the sun. Oh no, oh, oh, oh. But after all the loves of my life, after all the loves of my life, you'll still be the one. I'm gonna take my life into my hands, and I'm gonna use it. I will win the worship in their eyes. But life is kind of funny, and someday I'll lose it. I'm gonna have everything that I desire. Let my passions flow just like rivers to the sky. Oh yes, I will. But after all the loves of my life, let me tell you something. I intend to love all my life, but I'll be thinking of you and wondering, oh, I don't think I can take it. It took me so long to make it. And I may never have this recipe again. But I'll be wondering why me love? I'll be wondering why. Why'd you let it happen to me, love? I'll be wondering why.
Called You Can Pass Any Bar Exam, and she says that every one of us has a nickel and a quarter, and that has to do with her prescription on how to pass the bar exam, but how to pass any standardized exam.
That's right.
So what is your prescription?
Okay. You begin first with, and your former guests indicated much of what I'm going to say. First, you have to know the nature of the beast. So you've got to become what I call the master of the exam. What is it? Know it. How many parts to it? What has been the pass rate? So that then you can begin to look at how you can then address those issues. You then start looking at, what do I need to know? So you become the master, and for the bar exam, of the law, but whatever the substantive area is, the master of medicine, the master of dentistry, and recognize that licensing exams particularly test within a broad band. They cannot test you on areas of uncertainty. They must test you on things that are objectively verifiable, that you can go to a book and say, yes, that's right, no, that's wrong. And so because of that, you can learn this.
Now, you said that there were 3 parts to the bar exam. There's the federal law, the local law. What are those 3 parts?
Okay. There is, for the New York bar, for example, there's a local law day, which is New York's testing is local law. It's local criminal law, criminal procedure, civil procedure, domestic relations. The second day is the standardized test, which is the multi-state bar exam, which tests national or federal law. And that's where their mindset becomes important, because I don't know if you've heard it, but in my life I've heard it so many times, especially from African Americans, saying, I don't do well on standardized tests. Well, the first thing you have to recognize is this is not your typical standardized test. So you find out about it. Then you try to work it. For example, the bar exam. The bar exam is tested in 4 3-hour sections. So you begin getting used to everything you do. You're getting used to getting ready for the bar exam. You're in training. You clear your decks, because you must have quality study time.
Now, when you say clear your decks,
that means you get your finances together. That means that you get your relationships together, so that you don't, for example, call up heartache, which I'm sure you'll talk about in one of your programs. You get your living space together.
And in other words, you can't be in a tumultuous relationship with your husband or your boyfriend. Or your children. Okay, so that means that if you have children and you intend to pass the bar exam, that means that you have to get someone to take care of those children, and you also have to talk to those children and say, look, this is what mommy's going to do or daddy's going to do for 6 weeks, because you said that there are 6 week. It's a 6-week block that you have to prepare for it, and they have to understand. Everybody in your life has to understand.
That's right.
This is what you're going to do.
That's right, and you have to. And for some people, it's the first time they're sitting down and talking about the effort. With children, for example, I told you the story about my mother. I think I got into bar review or into testing because I saw my mother year after year struggle with the civil service exam. Now, she was a single parent. My father died when we were 8. We grew up in the Marcy projects. We had all the kinds of strikes, so to speak, against us. But what I saw her do was the determination. I'm going to do this. I saw her spread her books on the table once we went to bed. So all of that impacted me, and so it became part of the process and program that I tell students. You must have quality study time. You must have an area that's yours, so that when you look at that area, your intellectual juices start. You have to, if you cannot, you don't have the resources to hire a babysitter, find someone else who's going through this exam process with you, so that you and she or you and he can switch off, or have a study group. Study groups are important for people. Not necessarily towards the end of it, because sometimes it becomes a social exercise, but you need the kind of support for it.
But you also recommend that people take 6 weeks off. When you say don't work for 6 weeks, I mean, that's very difficult for a lot of people in the so-called rat race to say, oh, I'm just going to take 6 weeks off of my job to study for this exam. What is your answer to them?
What you have to do is you need preparation. It is all about preparation. If you know that you're getting ready to take a high-stakes exam in a year or so, you start holding on to your vacation days, holding on to those sick days. Do as much overtime as you can. Start a bank account. This is my test-taking bank account, so that I'll have the money to live on. If it's a graduation situation, I tell my students, when people ask, what do you give me? First thing you say, give me money. If that money's not, they can't, make me something that I can freeze, some food that I can freeze. So all I have to do is take it out of the freezer and put it into the microwave, so that you allow everybody to become part of this process. They buy into it, and your success becomes their success. So that in working, not just the bar exam, but any high-stakes exam, as I said, because what I'm now looking at is working on what I call the Black Person's Guide to Scoring High on standardized exams, working with my daughters on the SATs. I see the same kinds of behaviors, and just kind of move back into the stereotypical vulnerability. Big word, but meaning the same thing. You think about a stereotype about Black people, African Americans. Oh, we don't test well, or we're not smart, or we don't read well. So what happens? You're alone in your room having to study on the substantive area of the law or firefighters, as we discussed. And what do you hear? What's the ghost saying to you? Oh, who you kidding? Right. On one side is the devil, on the other side is the little angel. Right. The devil say, oh, come on, who you kidding? Right. And so what I try to do is beef up the angel. Right. Say, come on, baby, you could do this.
So you're right. Good. See, that's great, right?
But what you hear, what the devil says is, come on, now you see all those African Americans who fail out of the exam. What makes you think you any better than that? So and that's the playback.
So what do you tell?
Well, first we say you step back from the baggage. And part of the baggage is I say, look, when I took the bar exam, I took every Black person in America in that room with me. Mm. Why? Because I'm representing the race. Well, you know what? If I fail, the race doesn't fail. I fail. If I pass, I pass. And so it does well for those coming behind me, but I got to recognize that I'm not representing my race here. My race can represent itself in other endeavors, but this is not the issue for it. And moreover, it masks the individual. The individual has such strengths. It has its own challenges, and if you just buy into all the stereotypes of what people say you can do or can't do, then we won't get any further than where we are.
So what do you tell the individual when those thoughts come into those negative thoughts come into their head? Because that's one of your chapters, overcome negative thinking.
Well, you start out first off. You start out with bringing everybody into the arena, so it becomes a team effort. You look at, for example, for the bar exam, you learn you pass, your name is on the internet. So what I tell students to do now is download that sheet of paper that has, where your name would appear, erase that person's name who's taken your place, put your name in there. Now you can't just do it tacky. You have to put it in the same font and then Xerox so that you see your name in print. You have to act as if.
You've already achieved
it. You've already achieved it.
Now, we're going to have to close real soon, but let's talk about giving up certain things, like the telephone, getting your hair done, getting your nails done. Talk about prioritizing.
Well, that's it. What is your priority? First off, most exams, people, except for young kids, but for example, the SATs or for the firefighters exam, this is something you said you wanted, right? So it's got to be your number 1 or 2 priority. And if it's not, then you've got to re-examine. Are you just talking the stuff? Or do you really want this? Now, if you really want it, then you are in training. This is your time to shine. So what does that mean? It means that you give up, you eat right. Forget those Snickers and those candy bars because you've got to maintain your strength. You exercise because your brain is a muscle. You've got to have a life because you cannot do this 24/7 because you will peak too soon or you'll peak too late. You want to peak right at the bar exam, which means you have to let go of things that are going to sap your energies. Whatever those things might be that will sap your energies, if you get my drift.
Yeah.
And so
like the cell phone, sex. Let's just say it. Come out and say it. Well, but you talked about studying in 3-hour blocks because the test is 3 hours. So then you have an hour to come up for air.
That's right. So you tell people this is when you call me, or this is when you come see me. I mean, when I studied for the bar exam, note the past tense, I had a boyfriend. And I said, this is your day to come down. Well, he came down on a day that wasn't his. And he stayed at the front door. Because what he was saying was, choose.
Okay.
Well,
and that's what people have to recognize.
Well, I hope anyone who's watching is thinking about passing the bar exam, that you get this book by Edna Wells Handy, Esquire. You can pass any bar exam. And I think she had a lot to offer. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
She has baptized me into a new way of thinking.
Okay. Thank you for coming to
Thank
Producer
you for
Profile.
having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. You've been watching Producer Profile. Until next time. Bye.